I'm Brandi Kruse. Coming up today on Undivided, a judge has dramatically reduced the bail for a cop killer who's in the country illegally. Plus,
so we're asking the Secretary of State to either move my name up, sort of second essentially, above those two, or move them down below me.
Washington's Democratic Secretary of State says Bob Ferguson asked him to break the law. Plus, the Seattle Times writes an entire article about how a lot of women would apparently venture into the woods with a bear rather than a man. That and more coming up today on Undivided. Remember, you can support our show for just $5 a month by signing up at undividedpod.com. Hello, and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. You know what's not common sense? Dramatically reducing the bail for someone who's in the country illegally who killed a cop. Call me crazy. I don't think that makes one bit of sense, but in the state of Washington, this is just par for the course. You'll, of course, remember the death of Washington State Patrol Trooper Christopher Gadd at the hands of an undocumented immigrant who slammed into the back of Gadd's patrol car. High and drunk. His name is Raul Benitez Santana. It came out just shortly after Trooper Gadd was killed that Santana was in the country illegally. He's a citizen of Mexico, has been here for some time, and thanks to Washington State's sanctuary laws, had not been deported despite the fact that he had had several run-ins with law enforcement. So he's been behind bars awaiting trial for vehicular homicide. He'd been smoking weed. He had a blood alcohol level above the legal limit when, again, at high speeds, he slammed into the back of Trooper Gadd's patrol car in Snohomish County. So now it comes out, this from the Everett Herald, that a judge has dramatically reduced the bail for Raul Benitez Santana so that he can get out while he's awaiting trial, so that he can get back to his family. Never mind Trooper Gadd and his widow and their young child that he'll never get to see again. But of course, in this state, the priority is always the criminal. Or in this case, alleged criminal, although there is a preponderance of evidence that, of course, he did this. So from the Everett Herald this week, Benitez Santana's attorneys asked Snohomish County Superior Court Judge Richard Ockrent to release him from jail, arguing he is not a risk to commit other crimes and he would appear at future court hearings. Benitez Santana has no felony convictions, but does have several misdemeanors for driving with a suspended license. The attorneys, Emily Hancock and Tiffany Mecca, noted in court filings that Benitez Santana has long lived in Washington, despite his status as an undocumented immigrant from Mexico. The Department of Homeland Security placed an immigration detainer on him, seeking to deport him from the United States, according to court documents. Hancock and Mecca wrote their client has 3 children and works as a mechanic. He has many relatives in the Puget Sound region. They noted he didn't have the money to post the $1 million bail. If released, they wrote, his parents will welcome him back into their home. He is not a flight risk. Now, putting aside his immigration status, because in Washington state, in our state courts and our county courts, because of our sanctuary policies, Raul Benitez Santana is just like any other criminal defendant. They're not allowed to consider or weigh his immigration status when setting bail. And therefore, the $1 million bail that was set for him was due to nothing other than the serious nature of the crime and what he had done. And I'm sorry if this sounds crazy in Washington state, but $1 million bail when you killed a state trooper, when you were driving high and drunk with such disregard for the sanctity of human life that you killed someone, $1 million seems pretty fitting comparatively to other crimes that we see in the state and other crimes involving homicide. So this whole argument about, his immigration status shouldn't matter XYZ, technically it doesn't in our sanctuary state and under our laws and rules. Now, I would argue that it absolutely matters, because when you're talking about someone who isn't a legal immigrant to this country, who came here illegally, who has broken laws since they've been in the state of Washington, and now committed vehicular homicide. That to me is someone who has an awful lot of incentive to go back to Mexico. 10 years in prison, or maybe I go back to Mexico. So to me, the immigration status absolutely matters and should be considered a reason to keep someone's bail high, but not in Washington state. On Wednesday, Judge Ockrent reduced the defendant's bail to $100,000, according to the Everett Herald. Mr. Benitez Santana is a longtime member of our community, and Washington state is undeniably his home, his attorneys wrote in an email. The court did the right thing when it upheld the laws and policies of the state of Washington and lowered bail in this case from $1 million to $100,000. The defense worried, this according to the Herald, the defense worried officers from the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service may arrest Benitez Santana if he posted bail, interfering with future court proceedings in this case. They wrote an argument, the United States and Washington state constitutions unequivocally guarantee all individuals in our country the presumption of innocence and the right to a fair trial. It is imperative that no government entity, including INS, be allowed to circumvent these fundamental rights. And they're asking essentially that if Benitez Santana posts bail under this reduced amount, that federal authorities will not apprehend him and try to send him back to Mexico, that they'll ensure that he remains in Snohomish County to stand trial, which I want as well. And I imagine that the family of Trooper Gadd wants that. I don't think that INS or the federal government, if he posts bail, will snatch him up and send him back to Mexico before he goes on trial for killing a police officer. Now, what they're really concerned about is that he's going to go to federal detention. What they really don't want is for immigration to pick him up and hold him in federal detention, and that's where he's going to be without any bail, because that's how the feds would do it. Federal detention, no bail at all, and yeah, we'll get you back up to Snohomish County for your court hearing. Because in Washington state, what his attorneys want and what our very liberal criminal justice system wants, and activist judges, is for Benitez Santana to be walking around free, what they say, welcomed with open arms back by his parents, be able to hang out with his kids, go to work if he chooses, and completely ignore the serious nature of the crime. And they don't want him to be caught up at all in the immigration system. But think about that, $100,000 bail. In the bail system, that means you got to put down 20% cash in order to get out for a bail bondsman, and $100,000 equity. Anyone who owns a home in Washington state has $100,000 that they could assure a bail bondsman, hey, I'll come back to court. Or he can just, but the question is, of course, $100,000 and what you actually have to physically hand over in monies. Is that enough to get him from fleeing to not flee the country? I don't believe that it is when you're facing a significant prison sentence. And that's one of the points of bail, is will this person return? But it also sends a horrible message, one we continue to see sent over and over and over in Washington state. And that is the rights of the criminals. The rights and the feelings and what's fair and not fair. That in this state, we care more about that consideration for criminals than we do victims, than we do law-abiding people, than we do family members of victims. And this is another insane example of that. Again, the judge's name, because we do not, as a society, I think, and as voters, pay close enough attention to what's happening in our courtrooms and judges. Judge Richard Ockrent. Judge Richard Ockrent, Okrent. I don't know anything else that he's done on the bench, to be fair. I don't know if he has any other misguided decisions like this one. But I know enough based on this to say that if you see that last name and a judge up for election, Okrent, you don't fill in the circle next to him. There have to be consequences for these judges, and this is one of the many failures in our judicial system. Is you've got Democrats in Olympia, they push soft on crime policies. Those policies go into effect. You've got sanctuary policies. You give people just slaps on the wrist. You let them go on low bail. The whole system is broken. And the whole system is designed to lift criminals up and push the rest of us down. Why, you might ask? I just gave a speech on this last weekend. Why do you think they're letting the crime crisis get so bad? Just blatantly. Why do you think that they're taking away the ability of police officers to protect the public, do their one job, protect the public? Why do you think they're going after people like that owner of the car dealership in Eatonville, who is now facing criminal charges for pursuing a guy who stole his truck because police couldn't do it. Why do you think they're doing that? Make it impossible for police to protect you, punish you if you protect yourself, let the criminals go. It's because they want you to be so scared that you come crawling to the government for help. It's because they want you so fearful that you willingly give up liberties, that you willingly hand over more money for taxes, because they'll promise you, oh, give us this and this. Give up this liberty. Give us this money in taxes. We'll hire more officers. We'll make you feel safe again. And all the while, they're the ones who made you feel unsafe in the first place. They want to grow the size of government. And in order to do that, they need you to let them do it. And that's how you end up with a crime crisis as profound as the one we're dealing with now. That's how you end up with a homeless crisis as profound as the one we're dealing with now. A drug crisis, you name it, everything. When they allow it to get so bad, it's intentional and it's designed to increase the size of government, to make you so dependent on government that you'll give up anything. You'll give up your very freedoms to feel safe again, to feel secure again. And I, part of me hates to give them so much credit that it's this, grand conspiracy between all the judges and the lawmakers and all that. I don't think I'm quite tinfoiled enough for that yet. But whether they're doing it intentionally or not, that is the outcome. That you'll come crawling back to them saying, please keep us safe. I can't keep my own family safe. Can't even bring my kid to a freaking youth baseball game in Auburn without 30 rounds going off in the distance. Please help keep us safe. Unreal. I mean, slap in the face to Trooper Gadd's family. Slap in the face. And I really hope that the federal government carries through, because the state level can't tell them what to do. They can't tell the feds what to do. Snohomish County can't tell the feds what to do. So this is what needs to happen. When Raul Benitez Santana posts bail, which he will, now that it's been dropped to $100,000, the feds need to go pick him up and put him in a fed prison, in a detention facility for undocumented immigrants, and hold him there until his trial's over. And then as soon as his trial's over, as soon as he serves his sentence, and let's hope the sentence is fitting of the crime, then they go pick him up and they put him back in Mexico. That's what needs to happen. I hope the feds have the balls to do it. All right, okay, this is an absolute blockbuster story. Now, we suspected that Bob Ferguson, Attorney General Bob Ferguson, took things a little bit too far when he demanded that Washington's Secretary of State, Steve Hobbs, give him special treatment to make sure voters weren't confused about the two other Bob Fergusons who filed to run for governor as Democrats. Now, the other Bob Fergusons dropped out, probably under all these threats from the Attorney General Bob Ferguson that he would try to get his buddies in prosecutor's office to charge them with Class B felonies. But just a reminder, let me play the clip again. So Bob comes out. You guys know the story. Two other Bob Fergusons as Democrats filed to run at the last minute. So we're facing a situation where there's three Bob Fergusons as Democrats on the ballot. I don't blame Attorney General Bob Ferguson for losing his mind about it. Absolutely do not blame him for that at all. But in his anger and rage, he really showed us a lot about who he is, if we didn't know already, because he came out and he's like, if they don't drop out, I want all this special treatment from the Secretary of State's office, including actually reversing the order, changing the order that candidates for governor would appear on the ballot. Here's what he said.
After the drawing of straws on Friday afternoon, one of these Bob Fergusons will appear second on the ballot. The other will appear third on the ballot, and I appear number 13 on the ballot. So we're asking the Secretary of State to either move my name up, sort of second essentially, above those two, or move them down below me.
Now, when we saw that, I thought, that's illegal. You can't do that. By law, you go in and it's basically a draw of names, and there's 30 candidates in the race for governor, and they get put in that order. And if you draw the short end of the stick, and man, you're 30th, sucks to be you, but hopefully people really want to vote for you. And so Bob was all upset because he's like, you got two Bobs above me and I'm way down on the list. So why don't you take me and just move me up? Put me second on the ballot. Put me first, before the other Bobs. And I thought, I'm no lawyer, but that cannot be legal. That's insane. And it turns out I'm not the only one who thinks so. So there are a couple people now coming out and accusing Bob of asking the Secretary of State to break the law. Now, one of them is not so surprising. It is State Senator Mark Mullet, who is an opponent of Bob Ferguson's in the gubernatorial election. He's running as a Democrat, a more moderate Democrat. We've had him on the show before, and he spoke to the Washington State Standard. He said, "I completely condemn what those two Bobs did. That said, it is shocking to see the Attorney General requesting other agencies to break the law. That's how bad he wants this office. This speaks directly to Bob Ferguson's character, and that should matter to every voter in the state," Mullet said. Ferguson responded to Mullet sharply, saying he, quote, "does not know the law," and insisting there are provisions in state code providing Hobbs, the Secretary of State, authority to do what is needed to alleviate voter confusion, including revising the order of candidates on the ballot. This is what Bob Ferguson said of Mark Mullet, saying what you did was ask the Secretary of State to break the law. Bob said, "It's unfortunate Mullet does not support this simple act for election integrity, but perhaps the fact that he would have benefited from that confusion explains his anti-democratic position." So it wouldn't be too surprising or alarming to have an opponent of Bob Ferguson accuse him of doing something wrong, right? To have an opponent of Bob Ferguson say that Bob took things too far, that he not only asked for special treatment, but he asked the Secretary of State to break the law on his behalf. What is interesting, and what is very noteworthy indeed today, is that the Democratic Secretary of State, Steve Hobbs, is echoing what Mark Mullet says. And he is saying, in no uncertain terms, that Bob Ferguson asked him to break the law on his behalf. This again from the Washington State Standard. So it takes you through the timeline of events, and this is all very interesting. It says on May 13th, Ferguson held a press conference in Seattle, the one we just played a clip from, vowing to see the Bobs prosecuted for violating an 81-year-old state law that makes it a felony to challenge someone with the same name and whose political reputation is widely known. That same day, Zachary Pecalis, Ferguson's attorney, sent a letter to Hobbs saying he must include occupations for all three and redo the ballot so the other Fergusons appeared behind the Attorney General. The order set by state election officials had Bob Arthur Ferguson of Yakima appearing second, Bob Benjamin Ferguson of Graham third, and Bob Ferguson of Seattle, the Attorney General, in the 13th spot. After getting the letter, Hobbs phoned Ferguson to let him know he would include occupations for each, but he would not mess with the order of names on the ballot. This is what Steve Hobbs, the Attorney General, a Democrat, told the Washington State Standard in an interview. Quote, "I was surprised he was asking me to do something that I clearly cannot do because it's in the law. He was very upset. It was a spirited conversation." And he went on to say that like a first-year law student would know that what Bob Ferguson was asking him to do was against the law. And it gets into this kind of confusing thing because there's RCW, which is state law. And then there's WAC, or the WAC, which is administrative code. And so the law clearly states that you have this method to list candidates on the ballot that's a random draw. And there's this WAC code that says basically the Secretary of State has a lot of leeway in helping avoid voter confusion, but state law takes precedent over the WAC. And what Steve Hobbs is saying is you'd think the Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, would know that. You know, he actually picks up the phone and tells Bob, "I can't do that." And he said the result was a very spirited conversation. And I just want to note also, we have the letter. We have obtained the letter that Bob Ferguson's campaign sent to the Secretary of State's office. It's dated May 13th. And in it, he directs him. He doesn't ask him. He outright directs him to violate the law. He says, to mitigate voter confusion, you must adjust the order in which the three candidates' names appear on the ballot. You must adjust the order. There it is in black and white, undeniable. The Attorney General of the state of Washington asking the Secretary of State to violate the law on his behalf to help him in an election for governor. If that's not a scandal, I don't know what is. Now, I'm going to have more from that letter coming up in a moment, but first, I asked State Senator Mark Mullet, who again is a opponent of Bob Ferguson in the election, who has been very outspoken about what he sees as some of Bob Ferguson's character flaws, like this one, where he'll do anything to get elected governor. So I asked him to come on the show today and weigh in on what Bob asked of the Secretary of State. Mark Mullet, welcome back to Undivided.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right.
Happy to be back.
Look, the three Bobs thing, a little funny. A little funny?
Well, yeah, funny, but also annoyingly stupid. Like, I think it was not, we want to make people have faith and confidence in our elections, and we shouldn't be doing anything that would detract from that. And I think you, to your credit, highlighted that on your own show. And I think it was a powerful message to say, hey, we don't want anything that confuses voters. We want everything to be on the up and up.
Yeah, and I would have been livid if it had been done to you, if it had been done to Dave Reichert. So it's a little bit of moral consistency. But I did have a good giggle about it when it happened. And then I, moved on. So when Bob Ferguson came out and he had this press conference with three things that he expected or was going to ask of the Secretary of State's office if these two Bobs did not bow out, which they eventually did any of those things immediately kind of raise your alarm bells, or did you feel like you had to look into it a little bit?
Well, the third one immediately raised alarm bells because to me, it was very clear, I think, and I came out publicly saying I thought the two Bobs should withdraw their names from the ballot because I didn't think it was doing anything to help the situation. But the first one was very clear. Like, you can put people's occupation in there. The RCW clearly states that is what you do if you have two people by the same name list their occupation. The RCW also clearly states you do not rearrange the ballot order if there's multiple people of the same name to favor the one that happens to be currently in office. I mean, that is a clear violation of the law, and it's really shocking to me. Their own attorney general was asking a state agency to blatantly break the law for his own personal benefit.
Yeah, and he's saying that essentially you don't understand the law. And then he turned around and said that Steve Hobbs doesn't understand the law on this either. So do you guys both just collectively have no idea what you're talking about?
Well, I called Phil Talmadge. He's a former, Supreme Court justice in the state of Washington, because Bob's right. I'm not a lawyer. I sell pizza and ice cream for a living, so he's got me dead to rights of me not being a lawyer, but I do know lawyers. And so I called who I thought is a very competent, highly respected lawyer, and I said, hey, what's the situation here? He didn't even have any shadow of a doubt. He said it is crystal clear. The RCW always takes precedent over a whack. And Bob was referencing in his letter a whack. And so the Washington Administrative Code never can supersede what's in the revised Code of Washington. Bob knows that. I think Bob knows that. And it really is disappointing that he just wants this office so bad. So bad. He's willing to do anything. It doesn't matter who gets in the way. And I think he has gotten to the point where he's literally asking state agencies to break the law so it can work in his favor.
Yeah, and that was Steve Hobbs, again, a Democrat, the Secretary of State. His read on it, too, he said it doesn't take a first-year law student to know that, referring to RCW has to come before WAC. So he's getting a little dig in on Bob Ferguson, and Bob's argument is, well, the Secretary of State supports your campaign, and so he's just giving, a read of the rules, that's not going to benefit me. Is there any of that? Are you and Steve Hobbs in cahoots?
Not at all. That was the most ridiculous insinuation ever. So basically, Bob gets caught red-handed asking a state agency to break the law, and now he's trying to insinuate that there's some conspiracy, and it's complete nonsense.
Yeah. And I don't know Steve Hobbs well, but I got a chance to sit in his office and chat with him about some concerns I had around signature gatherers being harassed. And although he and I disagree on a few things, he doesn't strike me as the kind of person who would use his office to do favors for his friends. So, I don't know where Bob's on that either.
The Secretary of State, Steve Hobbs, had made it crystal clear. He was going to put professions next to those names.
Yeah.
He was going to make sure the voters knew which Bob was which. And so Steve Hobbs 100% planned to follow the law. And so to his credit, Secretary of State Steve Hobbs was in the right on this issue. Attorney General Bob Ferguson was in the wrong on this issue. And now I think it's going to be really interesting. There's a lot of lawyers in our state. I look forward to them weighing in on Bob's request, because I think it would be helpful for voters to understand, because like I highlighted, I think it speaks to his character.
Do you want some sort of action to be taken against Bob for that?
I mean, hopefully the action is just people realize this is his character. Like, he wants an office so bad. And this is, to me, I always say, what people get really frustrated about with politicians is they're more concerned about getting reelected than they are about doing the right thing. We are already seeing Bob's true colors. He's so concerned about getting elected. It's not about doing the right thing. It's like, what do I do to help me get elected? And, that goes back to the chicken checks, and it goes back to what we saw a week ago with this letter to Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. And to me, this is really important for voters to understand, because I always feel my strong suit in this office is I've always put what is good public policy, the right thing, first. That's actually made my own political life extremely difficult more often than not. But I'm proud of the fact that I've always done what I think is right, even when it creates my own political misery.
Yeah, you've had a lot of political misery, haven't you? Poor Mark Mullet. That's all right. But no, I think what's unique about this is, I'm obviously not a Bob fan. I talk about it a lot on the show. You obviously have a dog in the fight because you're in the race against him. But for Steve Hobbs to come out and say, he asked me to do something that I cannot do under the law, I think is a really significant development in this. One more issue I want to talk to you about before we let you go, just because the last time we had you on, this hadn't happened yet. You decided to talk to the Seattle Times. I don't know if they got the document elsewhere and reached out to you or what the situation was, but essentially the state Democratic Party sold its endorsement in the governor's race. I mean, that's how I see it, for $1 million. And you didn't have $1 million to give them. So it seems like they knew that, and that's why they went about doing this, because they don't typically do this, right? Pre-primary, like allow a candidate.
Completely unprecedented. It hasn't happened in the other races. And I think it just sets a horrible example. Right now it's two white guys, so be it. But what happens when it's the white male who happens to be in office, has to be sitting on millions of dollars of surplus campaign cash or their own campaign funds they've built up, and now it's a female minority who's running against them, and all of a sudden you can just buy the endorsement. I mean, I think the precedent looks really, really bad.
Well, do you think it was, and I might be like, I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on, and feel free to tell me if you think that I'm crazy. But when I look at this, like, clearly you have a situation where they're going to support Bob. He's got the money. So if they do, we're doing an early buy-in, Mark, here's your chance. You just have to give us $1 million. We'll consider you. But they knew you didn't have $1 million to give. But then you mentioned the surplus campaign funds. So he has this situation where he's got these surplus campaign funds that he might not be able to roll into his current election endeavor because it would surpass election limits. So now he has a place to put that money. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it's really dodgy. I think what we saw a year ago is Bob transferred over all his AG surplus money into the governor's race. The Public Disclosure Commission came out and said, you are basically violating the intent of the law, which is everyone is capped at $4,800 per person. He had numerous individuals that were transferring over way more than $4,800 per person. So when he undid all the money that was above that legal limit, he had to return $1.2 million out of his governor's account back to his attorney general's account. And the whole intent of that was that money was not supposed to be used towards the governor's race. I mean, that was very clear. That's why they had him return it. If they didn't care if it was used in the governor's race, they would have just said, just keep it in your governor's account. And now what we have is this backdoor way, because Bob didn't pay this $1 million buyout for the endorsement. He didn't pay it out of his governor's campaign account. He paid it out of the account that the Public Disclosure Commission made him return out of his governor account. So he paid it out of this other AG surplus account. And yeah, he just managed to basically circumvent once again the intent of the law, which was we want to cap people's individual donations at $4,800.
Wow. So it sounds political, like nerdy and insider baseball, but the money that he paid, to get the $1 million buy-in for the early endorsement came out of the AG's the surplus funds.
It came out of the pot of money the PDC made him remove from his governor's account and send back.
That's
so
more
the
than
money
dodgy.
He specifically, and this wasn't me, right? This was Hillary France. Like at this point, I hadn't even announced for governor. So this was between Bob Ferguson and Hillary Franz, where Hillary Franz, to her credit, was accurately pointing out he's clearly violating the intent of the law because he's transferring way more than $4,800 per person. I mean, to have $1.2 million he had to send back. And yes, he has now basically laundered that money into the governor's race through a back door.
Wild. It's wild. And this is the kind of stuff the average voter needs to know about. And that's why I always tell you, I said, we're rolling in the same direction on this, because one of my biggest flaws I find in Bob Ferguson is everything he does and says, or doesn't do and doesn't say, is a political calculation for him. How does it benefit me? How does it benefit my political ambitions and my political career? And that's just not someone who I want in the governor's office. And both of these stories are a reflection of that. So, Mark Mullet, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have you back on soon.
Hey, I'm happy to be on. Thank you very much, Brandi.
Shady, 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 shady stuff. I don't know how to get it across. Like, what you tell me, how do we reach more voters who are inclined to support Bob Ferguson, to let them know about the dangers of these sorts of things, about someone with that much power seeking even more power, who wants rules bent to his favor, who wants to circumvent rules. And again, every calculation, everything for him is a political calculation. And I want to read one more part that's kind of unrelated to what we just discussed from this letter that, again, Bob Ferguson's campaign sent the Secretary of State on May 13th, demanding this special treatment, that if the other two Bobs don't get off the ballot, here's everything you must do for me. One of them I just found to be incredibly petty. So one thing that the Secretary of State could do, and said he would do, is put their profession next to their name so people could differentiate. He has the authority under law to do that. And in this letter, Bob Ferguson told him how the names, how it should appear. It said you must identify, A.G. Ferguson as Attorney General. So he didn't even want it to be attorney. He wanted it to say Attorney General Bob Ferguson. But then the attorney in this letter went on to say the campaign is currently unaware of either fraudulent candidate's current occupation. So they were saying, essentially, we don't know how you need to refer to their occupation because we're unsure what their occupations even are. And you know how they call him a fraudulent candidate. But get this. It says, as for fraudulent candidate Robert Benjamin Ferguson, it says he's a military veteran. It says military veteran is neither an occupation nor a profession, but rather a status. The ballot should state his current occupation or profession, not any legally protected characteristic. So Bob is so petty. Attorney General Bob Ferguson is so petty, is so worried about, even if you differentiate them by occupation, some people might be more inclined to support a military veteran than to support the Attorney General, that he's saying, I don't know what you should call him, but you can't call him a veteran. Like, does that just not show a level of pettiness that someone who served our country, you're saying, well, that's not an occupation. That's a characteristic. So you can put Attorney General for me, but you can't put military veteran next to that guy's name. People, wake up. Anyone but Bob. All right, if you're thinking about selling your home at some point in 2024, check out a few real estate agents, sure, but do not choose one until you've asked our friend Wes Jones at sellwithwes.com to take a look at your home, your listing, and give his thoughts on it. He's been in this business for a long time. He's been on the ups and downs of the market, crazy interest rates, and I've heard nothing but positive feedback about Wes from unDivided fans. Bryce and Carla, they sold their home in Bellevue in January, moved to sunny Florida. They were both really impressed with Wes's knowledge of the market and what would need to be done in order to get them top dollar for their home.
His attention to detail, he was extraordinarily detailed, and he knew our neighborhood and our properties in the neighborhood very well. He gave us a really great comp plan, showed us what other properties were selling for, and most importantly, he helped us to understand the dangers of overpricing. And we thought what we knew we could get for the property, but we didn't. At the same time, he breathed a narrow reality into it, said, look, guys, you want to get that out of the property, you're going to need to start at a certain point, and you're going to let the market come to you. And that's exactly what happened. He was exactly right about that.
Yeah, Wes and his team at sellwithwes.com, their expertise on these issues really is unmatched. So if you're going to sell your home at some point this year, reach out to Wes Jones, sellwithwes.com. Start by using their home value calculator to see how much your home is worth. It might be worth more than you think. Sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. All right, you know the drill. On Tuesdays, a few weeks ago, we launched a new weekly segment with the Rental Housing Association of Washington. And our goal is to try to put frustration that we've had around what's happening to landlords in this state, the crazy tenant protections that are leading people to abuse the system, and turn that into some sort of positive action. How can we raise awareness for this? How can we make changes for this? And one of the things we want to talk to them about today is Initiative 2066. So we talked about it on the show yesterday, and we probably will again tomorrow as well. So Initiative 2066, you can sign it right now, and what it would do is it would prevent state lawmakers, Democrats in Olympia, from banning natural gas. So they've already been, trying. They've already been pushing through laws to allow Puget Sound Energy to move away from natural gas. And 2066 wouldn't repeal any sort of policies that are happening right now. But what it would do is say, you cannot take this away from folks as an option. Nicole, do you have the graphic for I-2066? Oh, sorry. Nicole's like, meh, it's arid. Oh, that's okay. So you can go to letsgowa.com, though, letsgowa.com, and you can ask them to find a location to sign it, to mail you some of the forms so that you can sign the forms and send them back in. So Initiative 2066. So we wanted to talk with Sean Flynn with the Rental Housing Association of Washington today about Initiative 2066, and not so much about whether the RHA is taking a position on it, but if we have a situation in this state where they ban natural gas and people have to electrify their homes at a cost of tens of thousands of dollars, there is little doubt that that would make even worse the current housing affordability crisis that we have in Washington state. So again, here's Sean Flynn with the Rental Housing Association. How does that impact your housing providers who are members of RHA or even the housing supply?
If the course of legislation goes the way it seems to be looking like it's going, which is eventually a ban, either whether it be a regulatory ban, they do it through the Building Code Council, or through actual legislation, what that means is a whole lot of folks in the state, both in rental housing and in owner-occupied housing, are going to have to eventually move to electrify their homes. So if you've got a natural gas furnace and they don't offer gas anymore, that means you're going to have to upgrade your heating system in your house. And that's going to be a considerable cost. At RHA, we generally oppose legislation that will make housing less affordable. And we have real concerns about the banning of gas as a heating and fuel source option because of the cost it's going to put on existing housing and the inevitable cost it's going to put on new housing. So we're real concerned about it both on a cost side, but also on a supply side.
And it seems likely that if a homeowner who rents the home has to electrify, let's say it's a $20,000 cost or more, they'd probably increase rents.
Yeah, I mean, that's the type of cost that that eventually trickles down to the cost of providing the housing, right?
It's amazing to me that people who talk about affordable housing don't see this kind of thing. I think there's a lot of lawmakers in Olympia who talk about the affordable housing crisis, which I do think it's a crisis. I do think that we have a lack of affordable housing and housing that a working class family can afford. So I don't deny that. But then it just feels like a lot of policies they push have a very clear trickle-down effect that make housing more expensive. But am I crazy, or if it feels like they just ignore that or just won't acknowledge it?
I think that, in around housing policy generally, it's the rule of unintended consequences. So clearly we have an affordability crisis in the state, and that's because we haven't built enough housing for like the totality of my life. And that leads to a massive affordability crisis. And the issue is that folks set out with good intentions, but fail to realize that what they're doing was going to just make the housing that is existing less affordable. So it ends up oftentimes a lot of the policies they push over the last 10 years have not made the affordability crisis better. It's made it worse, and it's hurt the very people they set out to help.
You know, one of the things I told you when we started this segment is I really want to keep this issue on people's radar well before the legislative session, because sometimes we wait until the session and then it's like there's so many competing interests and things just slip through and we don't realize them. Do you guys have, as an organization, a list of policies you want to push or repeal, and that's what you try to get the attention of lawmakers for ahead of the session?
Yeah, so we have what's called a legislative agenda. And one of the ones I'm most excited about is what we're in the office, we're calling the TAP bill, the TAP. Turn on the tap. And what it is it's a different way of thinking about tenant assistance. What we found during COVID, and while COVID was terrible and no one wants to go back to those days, we did learn some things. And what we learned was that early money in the process for a tenant is the best return on investment that you're going to get. So if you've got $500, right, to inject into a troubled tenancy, it is better to get that money in at the beginning rather than at the end, because by then the costs have mounted dramatically. Ideally, this program would set up a stream of payments for folks who need temporary assistance. It is better to get that money in right away rather than have that $600 turn into several missed months of rent payments. And then suddenly you've got eviction costs and court fees, plus all of the stress and anxiety on both the tenant and on the housing provider.
And how do you prevent abuse of that system? Because I think that's one of my concerns. You know, you look at the case of Jaskaran Singh, where now, you know, the King County Bar Association, through that, you know, via the Housing Justice Project, cut a check for $50,000 to pay, you know, a full year of this guy's back rent. And then on May 1st, he didn't even pay rent again. So how do you, through a program, if that were to be instituted, how do you prevent someone who's like, oh, I know I got this, you know, taxpayer funds or whatever it is over here, and so I'm going to spend my $500 on, you know, something else I want, and then make the taxpayers pick up the bill for me?
It would be a one-time payment. So it would not be an ongoing amount that they would receive monthly. And the dollars would be short, would be small amounts of money, right? So this is not designed to provide a $50,000 check to pay someone's back rent for a year. The whole purpose of this program is to get a small amount of money, $600, $800, $1,000, right, into the housing provider's hands and the tenant's hands to pay for their housing, so they don't end up getting further in arrears. What we see on the classic abuse situations on tenant assistance is something like you were just referring, and it's the large dollar numbers that attract that. So we think setting it up so that either party can apply for it, and setting it up so that it's small amounts and one-time payments will reduce a lot of the abuse. Yeah,
because it is, I mean, ultimately what we're talking about is making the housing providers whole again. And I think we all want that. You know, we don't want them to be out funds, and landlords don't want a bunch of turnover. You know, they don't want to evict someone and then have to go through the process of finding someone else to be in the unit. Do you have in mind what the max amount of assistance would be for an individual tenant?
We were looking somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 cap.
Gotcha.
Which, you know, we think could do a lot of good. The program is not designed to be a long-term subsidy. It's there for an emergency situation to enable the tenant to maintain their tenancy over a period of time.
Yeah, so again, that is Sean Flynn with the Rental Housing Association of Washington. And that's the thing is like, okay, if you're going to look to, sometimes stuff happens, life happens, right? And you have someone who's been a good tenant, and then they're short 1 month. So do you sort of let them snowball where then they're short the next month, and now you're in a situation like Jaskaran Singh where he has a tenant who hasn't paid rent in 2 years, and then taxpayers are cutting a check for $50,000 to bail the guy out and he still doesn't pay rent. So I don't know that it's such a controversial idea to say, okay, you've got someone on a one-time basis who's having trouble meeting rent. We don't want the landlord to be out money. We don't want the person to fall into homelessness or into eviction. And it's a true case of need. I don't see an issue with injecting $500 or $1,000 as a one-time payment compared to the burden on taxpayers and on the system if you don't. So it's an interesting concept. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about doing something like that. And also, if you do that, will you take away the free attorneys, right? Because some of these tenants who are truly abusing the system, getting all this free legal assistance when landlords don't get any free legal assistance. So just inherently doesn't seem fair. And so if you're a landlord and you've got, just a few units, a handful of units, I'll tell you what, we've already heard from multiple landlords that they are just so glad that they're members of RHA. It's like $260 a year. And then RHA has your back hopefully to prevent stuff like this from happening, but God forbid it does. So to find out more, rhawa.org, rhawa.org. And just as another reminder, find a place to sign Initiative 2066 today. Find a place to sign Initiative 2066 today. We need like 405,000 signatures by the 4th of July in order to get this on the ballot and make sure that state lawmakers don't take away your ability to use natural gas in your home or business. So letsgowa.org or letsgowa.com. You can find locations for that. All right, we got a double dose of unbelievable for you today. First, apparently women are debating who they'd rather be in the woods with, a man or like a bear, a ferocious bear. And I guess a lot of liberal women are saying that they would rather be in the woods with a bear. Yeah, let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. Boop. Bear or man? Bear or man? And I'm not talking about a man who's big like a bear. What do they call them? And they got all the fur. Some gay men are called bears. I've been to Cuff on Capitol Hill enough times.
Okay.
Yeah, the big guys, and they've got like a lot of facial hair and chest hair and stuff. I'm talking about man versus a real bear. So apparently this whole debate started as like a TikTok thing, asking women, who would you rather be in the woods with? A man or a bear? Man versus bear, which it's just a whole stupid conversation. But apparently nothing is too stupid for the Seattle Times to write an entire article on it, because the Seattle Times took this weird TikTok challenge where a lot of women were picking a bear. A lot of young girls or women were saying, I'd rather be in the woods with a bear because men are dangerous and evil, essentially. So the Seattle Times and a columnist they have who writes a lot of horrible columns, Naomi Ishisaka. Naomi Ishisaka. She's done some columns that we've talked about in the past that are just way, way out of left field, literally. So she writes a whole article, Why Women Prefer the Bear in Man versus Bear. Buckle up, buttercups, because this is a trip down crazy town. Even at just 15, my niece didn't hesitate last week when I asked whether she would rather be in the woods with a man or a bear. I definitely choose the bear. This never happened, but that's what she says her niece said. That's because, unlike her experiences with men, a bear has never harassed her, catcalled her, followed her, thrown a bottle at her, or otherwise made her feel unsafe.
Wow.
Oh, you haven't
Is that in Seattle? Sounds like it.
Yeah, if you haven't been catcalled by a bear before? First of all, okay, we'll keep reading, and then I have a lot of this to dissect. Naomi goes on to write, despite the loud protestations to the contrary, women are not just being paranoid. Worldwide, about 1 in 3 women have been subjected to physical or sexual violence by intimate partners or strangers at least once in their life, the UN reported. In the U.S., women experience 85% of intimate partner violence and are far more likely to be killed by that violence than men. There is nothing inherent about cisgender men that makes them prone to harassment or violence. This is, did they specify that it had to be a straight guy? Like now we're just assuming that the man versus bear challenge must only be referring to dangerous straight men who are the gender they were born. What is going on here? She goes on to write, this is not a function of some essential, immutable characteristic. This is learned behavior and can be unlearned. But we are raising men and boys in a culture where women are given tip sheets on how to stay safe and avoid being targeted, but rarely gives instructions for men on how not to be dangerous to others. Oh my God. The implication, of course, is that the responsibility is on women to be more vigilant, and if something happens, you should just have been more careful. What does this have to do with a bear in the woods? What does any of this have to do with a bear in the woods? Like, men can be dangerous. Yes, women can be dangerous. I don't dispute the fact of that men are responsible for much more of intimate partner violence. What does it have to do with the bear? in the woods. And this Seattle Times columnist talking about her 15-year-old, I just want to reread that one quote where her 15-year-old niece said, "I would definitely choose the bear. That's because, unlike her experiences with men, a bear has never harassed her, catcalled her, followed her, thrown a bottle at her, or otherwise made her feel unsafe." Well, that's because bears don't have posable thumbs, but I also would venture to guess that this 15-year-old has actually never encountered a bear. So you're comparing something that's happened to this 15-year-old, allegedly, probably not, with men, but like, has she ever been in the woods with a bear? Has she ever experienced what that would be like? Because it would probably be a lot worse than being catcalled, being mauled to death by a grizzly bear. I have to imagine, like, probably much worse than having a bottle thrown at you or being catcalled by a man, if that has actually happened. Naomi goes on to say in this article, "Like most women I know, I too would choose the bear." What women do you know? I don't know any women that would choose the bear. "Too many experiences over my lifetime have taught me that would be a safer choice." You really believe that being in the woods with a bear versus a man would be a safer choice? Like, they hate men.
Have you been mauled that many times by a man?
To be honest, she writes, when I was a kid, I never really questioned if it was fair or just that I had to maintain situational awareness at all times to fend off the neighborhood flasher or the creepy guy where I was babysitting. I just knew that I must. And yeah, if you lived in an area with a lot of bears, you'd probably be told to maintain situational awareness if you're hiking through the woods alone, lest you encounter a bear that could kill you with one swipe of its paw. But yeah, if you grow up in a city environment, you're probably going to be taught more about being cautious about your surroundings in a city environment, which, yeah, would include, as you put it, the neighborhood flasher or the creepy guy where you were babysitting. But if you grew up in an area where you were going to have encounters with ferocious bears, something tells me you probably would have been taught to avoid those encounters as well. Why are we even having this conversation? Why is this dedicated a whole little section in the Seattle Times? Have I gone mental? Am I here?
It's the nuclear family. They want to make men look bad.
They hate men.
They hate men.
And cisgender men, remember.
Yeah.
Now, if the question had been, would you rather be in the woods with a bear or a gay man? Or a trans man? They'd be like, oh, a trans man, of course.
For sure.
But if it's a cisgender man, it's like, no, give me the bear.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. I asked you guys this. I kind of felt stupid making this our daily subscriber poll today because I didn't know if people had read the Seattle Times column, and so it was just so random because I asked on Patreon Locals and X, would you rather be in the woods with a bear or a man? And people were probably like, what are you talking about today? Why is this our daily show poll? I swear to God, you guys, if I go to these polls right now and you have chosen a bear, I quit. I quit my job. I'm moving on. You're not who I thought you were. Okay, thankfully, we're in the land of sanity still. Most of you, at least on Patreon, 75% say man. There's still some people who say bear. Travis Eberly says, men can be reasoned with. Bear is just gonna bear. Choose the chance of predictability. Let me see. Joel
it's a very
says,
serious answer.
Joel says, duh. Denise says she chooses man as long as it's her man. Matt Gilbert, for all the liberal women who said bear, now you know why we don't want men in women's bathrooms and locker rooms. Let me see. Slim, yeah, that's a good point, right? Oh my gosh, Matt, that's such a good point the more I think about it. For any liberal women who say bear, because men are dangerous, but you want to allow men in women's locker rooms? Wow. That's really strange. That's just super weird. E says, I've been in the woods with both. I prefer the bears. They leave you alone. Humans are obnoxious in the woods. Man, woman, and especially children. You know who bothers me the most in the woods? I mean, it would be a bear.
Okay.
If the bear was there. Or a
I would
cougar.
hope so. Mm-hmm.
Like, I would turn around and walk away. Mm-hmm. The people who are the most obnoxious in the woods are the ones who have a dog on a leash who says, my dog's not friendly. And I'm like, why is it here? It happens every time we're on a hike. Sorry, my dog's not friendly. Why do you have it on a well-traveled trail where there's
on a
children
leash?
and other people?
On a leash?
On a trail this big? Do you think it matters the dog's on a leash if you say my dog's not friendly? If you're on a trail that's 3 feet wide and you got kids passing by it?
I think they just don't
mouth
want you to
level?
touch their dog.
Well, maybe they shouldn't bring their dog in public then. Or maybe they should be better dog parents and make sure their dog's trained not to be scared. But I digress. Let me read a couple off of Locals or X really quick. Man or bear? Let's see. Potter says, I'm pretty sure I have the means and knowledge on how to decapitate a man by hand if I need to.
Wow.
By hand?
Okay.
Oh my gosh. There's a lot of people who wouldn't even give me an answer. They're like, Brandi, what are you talking about? Let me see. Matthew Cook says, nothing like a stupid internet viral video for another opportunity to tell the world how awful men are. I voted man because, to quote Del Griffith from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I like me. My wife likes me. All right, that was entertaining. Yeah, I would choose a man. And even if it were a creepy man, because I'm a black belt, I don't know if you knew this about me, but I feel like either mentally I could, outwit them, thank you, or physically, like, I'm going straight for the...
Yeah, we know the soft spots.
We know the soft spots. It should get you in the eye.
Yeah.
A bear, like, I'm just screwed, right? I'm not Cinderella. I'm not going to, like, lull the bear into loving me and singing me a tune. So anyway, unbelievable.
It's comical.
Speaking of unbelievable, we have a double dose today. It took just an hour and a half for the University of Washington to display for all to see its utter hypocrisy. What did I tell you guys about the UW encampment with the anti-Israel folks? I said if this were right-wingers or someone else, with some cause that wasn't left and progressive, they would be gone in a second. Gone in a second. So yesterday, the UW came to an agreement with the terrorists that had been occupying the quad and said, okay, if you leave by 3 p.m., we're going to do all these things, divestment, blah, 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 Islamophobia task force. We're also going to make sure you don't get in trouble for having camped here or done any of these other illegal things. No big deal. So 3 p.m. comes around, and I would say the vast majority of the quad was cleared. There might have been a couple of hangers around, but I think the UW was giving them time. But there was also a man, a street preacher, who might be familiar to you because he goes out to some of these things. His name is Matthew Meineke. So Matthew had been at the quad with a tent almost the entirety of this time, but not part of their encampment, sort of off to the side. And he was there to preach the word of Jesus Christ. Right? So he was there for a different purpose as sort of a counter protest, and they just sort of allowed him to exist there. But when we were at the encampment, there were some conflicts between the two of them. But anyway, so the anti-Israel folks come to an agreement with UW to leave at 3 p.m., and UW police come to make sure that this is carried out. And Matthew Meineke says, I'm not leaving because now I'm protesting, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to protest what the University of Washington has allowed for the last month. Here's a clip from Matthew's perspective of talking to this officer.
Camping is not allowed on campus property. Now, by all means, stay here all you want, but the camp part has to come out. The tent part has to come out. Again, the time was at 3 p.m.
I hear you.
It is almost 4:30 now.
I hear you. I was never part of that agreement. We're taking a stand against the administration right now, a civil stance, for what they did and allowing the violence towards us and the destruction of property. Okay, we lost over $1,300 worth of belongings here. We have been harassed. We have had discrimination enacted upon us.
Yeah, I love this. So he's saying this is a new protest. I wasn't part of this old agreement. I didn't strike a deal with the university to leave at 3 p.m. I'm protesting the university. I'm protesting the destruction that they allowed people to steal stuff from us, to ruin our equipment or whatever it was. So the cop says, well, that's just too bad because, as he said there, camping is illegal here. You can't camp here, although we let all these other people camp here for weeks and weeks on end. And so the cop actually goes through and trespasses the street preacher from the location.
You're being trespassed from the quad.
Formally, yes.
This is my name. This is my badge number, and there's the date and time.
Yes.
Okay.
I am
and this will
fully understanding it, and no disrespect to you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yes.
Interesting. So if it's Hamas supporters, they can camp there, indefinitely until they feel like a good deal's been reached, where the UW hears them out, gives in to some of their demands. But a preacher who now wants to start his own protest there in the Quad to push back against what the university has done, the deal they reached with these anti-Israel people, nope. Took an hour and a half, trespass, day one. Now, I don't know if he's going to leave. It doesn't seem like he's going to leave, and what their actions are going to be. But what would have stopped UW from doing exactly what that officer just did to that street preacher day one, that people started camping in there to protest Israel? What was stopping them? Nothing was stopping them except their flaming ideology. I would also note, I have a gift that we're mailing to the president of UW today, Anna Marie Cossey, and it is a copy of our favorite book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. It says this book belongs to Anna, and I've written a nice little note in there. I said, President Cossey, I hope this book can help guide you through the challenges ahead. Isn't that nice? So we're going to just toss that old guy in the mail.
I like it.
I'm not hearing you right now. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's weird. Oh, it's because I came unplugged.
Whoops.
It's okay.
You're still there.
I'm here now. So yeah, I have a whole stack of these I've been accumulating. For just such an occasion.
Yep. It's perfect occasion.
Unbelievable. To the president of UW, I'm telling you, this book, it can just help you through so many different things. It is a nice little life lesson book to guide you through making difficult choices. All right. Anyway, that's unbelievable. Moving on, we're going to get to your questions and comments coming up next. First, if you are getting close to retirement and you're worried about inflation, understandably so, our friend Zach Abraham with Bulwark Capital calls inflation the silent portfolio killer. And that's why on May 30th, they're having another one of their free risk webinars. And this one is going to be specifically focused on inflation, managing your risk and managing your portfolio against inflation. So it's happening again Thursday, May 30th. You can sign up for it totally free at knowyourriskradio.com. knowyourriskradio.com. As soon as you go to the website, a little pop-up box will come up and you can sign up for it there. And at their inflation webinar, you're going to learn about Bulwark Capital Management's risk management strategy, how they actively manage portfolios, always seeking to lower risk, lower cost, give you as much upside as possible. So if you haven't tried one of these seminars before, you learn a lot, and there's no obligation to sign up or invest with Bulwark Capital or Zach and his team. And in fact, you don't have to be an active participant. You can just sit there and listen if you'd like to. So it's happening Thursday, May 30th. Sign up now, knowyourriskradio.com. It is totally free. Investment advisory services offered through Trek Financial LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. Investments involve risk and are not guaranteed. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. We're skipping national today because, we had a lot of local news to get to. So we'll let the talking heads of the world deal with national news today. All right, questions and comments. A lot of super chats. Thanks, guys. Matthew Cook on the guy who killed Trooper Christopher Gadd getting his bail dropped. Matthew says, he who would trade liberty for some temporary security deserves neither liberty nor security. Benjamin Franklin. It's a good quote. Very, very apt for people who would give up their very freedom so the government will maybe help them feel safe, maybe help them be safe. H with a $5 super chat. Judge Ockrent, the one who lowered the bail, used to be an attorney for parents, kids in foster care that are involved with CPS. That's interesting. Was he a good attorney, bad attorney? Because I'll tell you what, right now, he's not looking like a very good judge. Bill Biz with a $20 super chat. Between sanctuary laws, activist bail funds, and activist judges, we're well on our way to Californication. Oh yeah, we're 95% of the way there for sure. Kyle T, bail isn't supposed to be affordable. It's supposed to be based on the degree of the crime. Lose some cash and flee to Mexico or face life in prison? Yeah, real tough call. Yeah, there's a couple tenets to bail. It's interesting how much liberty judges take with it, though. It's supposed to be, the severity of the crime, the likelihood to reoffend, and the likelihood to reappear for trial. So, severity of the crime means typically you're going to face a higher sentence if you're convicted at trial. So that impacts your likelihood to come back, to face up to the consequences of your actions. And then your likelihood to commit another crime. And I would say that this is someone who, again, acted with such disregard for human life and who'd already come into the country illegally, couldn't obey the laws when he got here. So it's just insane to me. $100,000 bail. Give me a break. Slap in the face to law enforcement. Sharon Barber, Benitez would be stupid to not leave the state if he gets out. He's facing serious time in jail. And also, he's already going to face deportation. The feds already have a retainer on him. So think about it from his perspective. You could go back to Mexico and not face up to the vehicular homicide charge. Or you could face up to the vehicular homicide charge, spend 5 to 10 years in prison, and then go back to Mexico. So what are you going to do? And the fact that the judge will see that, he's going to go back to Mexico unless ICE comes and scoops him up, which you better. I mean, the feds, please don't drop the ball on this. Insane. Let me see. On Fergie, old sub sailor, which, by the way, do you have a license plate that says old sailor? It was like old, like I was like, is that our buddy old sub sailor? $10 super chat. Bob Ferguson is a little man with too much power and a Napoleon complex. He will not make a good governor. I so dread the prospect. Amen. Me too. Carlene Heath. Bob stomps his feet and holds his breath like a little kid. Someone wasn't spanked as a child. Yeah, you got to get a good whooping. I talked about the whooping my little brother got for throwing a hammer at me with a willow branch. That looked like it hurt. I still remember it. Sarah McConnell or Kirk Connell. Bob is so whiny. Nothing like a grown man in a suit having a toddler tantrum in public. Yep. Matt Gilbert. The red pilling of Brandi Kruse would make a great musical. Can I tell you a story that I was thinking about yesterday, Nicole?
Of course.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
Don't repeat this. Okay, I'm only telling you guys because I'm like genuinely embarrassed by it. I have been really red-pilled in the last 3-4 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's helped that this place is so
crazy.
Blue.
Oh, it's so crazy.
You can't help yourself but go more and more red.
But also like just to see, it's not, well, red pill doesn't mean you're being conservative. You know, it just means you're seeing things for what they really are. But I was just thinking about, so I went to yoga the other night. And I take this yoga class on Sunday evenings. That's basically just a sleep fest. People fall asleep every time. It's like this deep, it's called this yin like sound bath. So it's basically like you're just like snoozing, right?
Yes.
So I was like, I'm going to bring a pillow this time because why not? I'm going to bring a pillow to this yoga class.
Do people do that? They bring a pillow?
Not really, but I was like, why not? So it's super comfortable.
Why don't you just take a nap?
I promise I'm getting somewhere with this and it ties back to politics. So I was like, let me bring a little one. And I remembered that we had these Mike Lindell My Pillow travel pillows, like 2 of them. I was like, that's perfect because it kind of doesn't look like a pillow and I could bring it in and not, raise any alarm bells. So I go in the closet and I'm looking, I promise it's going somewhere. And I'm looking for them. And then it hit me. I remembered about a year before I quit my job at Fox, I threw those pillows away because I had such bad TDS.
Wow.
Because I'm like, oh, Mike Lindell. I threw away 2 perfectly good My Pillows, like out of some sort of Donald Trump protest.
Like he was gonna
be
harmed by that.
Like I was like I was gonna hurt him having already purchased them. I think they were gifted to us.
That is sad because I bet those were very nice pillows.
Yeah, but now I'm admitting it and I'm a little embarrassed. So I swear to God, don't tell anybody.
Are you going to buy some new ones to replace?
I feel like I should. I remember them being like pretty nice little travel pillows. So I didn't have my travel pillow for yoga because I'm a recovering TDS type 1 person. Anyway, so yeah, the red pilling of Brandi Kruse would make for a good musical.
Yoga
I know I'm super embarrassed. Let's see. Michelle Harryford sent us a message. Just writing to say keep up the great work. I also want to mention that as of this weekend, we have taken the First Mark Challenge. Oh, I like this one. They couldn't save us any money, but hey, great to know they are for many. What does that mean?
Well, I just think that they couldn't save the money, but they could save money for others. Oh,
great to know they're making. Yeah, and that's one of the nice things about First Mark is if they'll can't save, they're just going to tell you and say, hey, we can't help you. You're doing great on your own. We had the best coverage and cost already. Also, we were the first listeners for your podcast to have an appointment with Tig over at Natchez RV Resort. Wow. And the first listener to buy on this past weekend's grand opening. Oh my God, that's great. Can you invite us, please? Can you invite us? You were 100% correct. The people were all welcoming and amazing. I also signed Initiative 2066. Michelle, you're just winning
Listener
today.
Of the day.
So much winning. I love it. Okay, with that, let's get to some more losing, shall we? Well, first, before we get to our closing sanity check, since we brought it up with Michelle right there with First Mark, I have encouraged you guys to take the First Mark Challenge, and I think Michelle gave a really good example as to why. First of all, they are a local company, local people. They've been doing this for a long time. And if they can't help you, they're gonna be honest with you. But I think you learn so much in the process of the First Mark Challenge, going through it, figuring out, is the insurance I have the insurance I need? Do I have the best insurance at the best rate? And we've heard a variety of stories from listeners who've taken the challenge. Either like Michelle, First Mark said, hey, you actually have good insurance on your own. We can't do any better than that. So you should keep what you already have. And just sending her on her way. Or Casey in Covington says he did the First Mark Challenge. They saved him 37% off their auto quote. So I think that's great. So take the First Mark Challenge. You could get information from it. You could get a better policy. You could save money. There's just a lot of good outcomes. FirstMarkInsurance.com, FirstMarkInsurance.com. They work for you. Now we'll get to our closing sanity check. All right, so we already know our sense of safety is completely eroded, and we just have to give up, apparently, things that we like to do because the government absolutely cannot fix the underlying issues. We talked about the story in California where they took out lights at a 4-way interchange because the homeless people kept stealing copper out of them. And so rather than get rid of the homeless encampment, what do? Well, just get rid of these stoplights. There's already a crash at the intersection over all of it. We talked about on the show yesterday, the youth baseball team that was playing down in Auburn when dozens of shots rang out in the distance. And now what's happening? Well, the folks who are doing the youth baseball there are deciding whether they ever want to go back and play another game there because the government's not going to fix the problem. So they're like, well, maybe we just have to, it's a beautiful park. Maybe we just can't play there anymore. So now we're going to lose the beaches as well. Let's add this to the list of things that we have to just give up, that we have to just stop doing, that we enjoy, because the government cannot take action. This is from Como News. Seattle beaches adjust hours for third year to curb summer crime and violence. Oh yes, you heard that correctly. Rather than, I don't know, some emphasis patrols to deal with some of the violence that happens on our beaches, a lot of it gang related, but you can't talk about gang violence. You can only talk about gun violence rather than do anything about that because they're lazy, incompetent, and it's not politically advantageous for them. What do? Well, they screw over law-abiding Washingtonians who would like to sit on a beach and watch the sunset. That has been your sanity check for today, and that has been today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. We appreciate every single one of you. Michelle, invite us to Natchez RV Resort. We would like to come see you. That's it. We'll see you back here on the live show tomorrow at noon. If you have not signed up to support the show, undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com. We also still have 25% off everything in our merch store using the promo code SANITY24. That's SANITY and the number 24.